question before us is, did anybody say, or did we suggest the possibility that the Bible is the Word of God passed by Moses to the people of Israel? And I don't remember if we offered that possibility, but certainly many Jewish people believe that. And that is one of many possibilities that what I wanted to do was introduce the idea of studying the Hebrew Bible as a literary document. And we asked what it was, and some people said it's a storybook, and some people said it's a law book, and some people said it's a collection of myths, a collection of origin stories. And what I wanted, and I asked what the Bible thinks it is, and this was important. And what it thinks it is, at least in Genesis, is a history of the world created by God, beginning in the beginning with the creation of the universe and the creation of humanity. But I also suggested to you that what we know is that it is not a single book, but an anthology. Even more, not an anthology, but a library with pieces of it composed over thousands of years and redacted together by an editor. Now, many Jewish people hold both because we can. We can hold that it is the Word of God given to Moses on Mount Sinai and passed to the Jewish people as the first in a series of Jewish texts that is the template for living a Jewish life. You can hold that in one pocket, and in the other pocket you can be a literary scholar and say, and yes, it's a collection of myths written over time, stitched together over thousands of years, a library of multiple documents, including legal documents and poetry and origin stories and myths. And in fact, many devoted religious people do hold both, right? And we can hold both. So, but if those two things feel like a contradiction to you, choose. Right, exactly. Thank you very much. That's the word I needed. Choose. It's completely up to you. But I have a particular agenda in this series of 4 lessons with you. And that is the agenda of suggesting that the stories in the Bible, that is not all the rest of it, not the legal stuff, not the poetry, but the stories are part of the foundation myths of our culture. And as foundation stories, they are a history of the present, right? Our foundation myths, whether it's the Odyssey, whether it's the Hebrew Bible, they tell us how things came to be the way they are. And when stories tell you how things came to be the way they are, they also imply that the way things are the way things have to be, right? Because God made it this way, and stories, old stories, foundation stories, the details of them are repeated so often, they become the patterns of our narrative that they begin to feel true. They create an inevitability. So what I was suggesting last time is that when God creates a classification system and puts the sun over here, and the moon over here, and the water over here, and the land over here, there is an organization of the planet that feels inevitable, because opposites are not inevitable. It is not inevitable that man is the opposite of woman, that wet is the opposite of dry, but we create these opposites. Where there's an opposition, there's always a hierarchy. We did that. Remember I said, what's better, day or night? And everybody said day, even though we know sometimes night is better. But we inherit these cultural assumptions based upon our classification system. And this feels like truth. But it's this very truth that I want us to explore. And today we're going to look at one particular story as we go deeper into the Bible to look at the origins of several stereotypes about Jewish people. But before that, I want to review a little bit more. I suggested that the Bible is both old and young. That it is old because it's been in the world a long time, right? And it's been papered over by interpretations. So that it's very hard to read it as once it was, because it's been reread and reinterpreted so often. That was the first thing. And it's young because it's an artifact from a younger world. It's innocent of all its own interpretations. It doesn't know about Lilith, for example, which we looked at the end of the session. The Bible is a much purer document. It's innocent of interpretation, and it is an artifact of the world when there was much less literature in the world. That was the first thing. And the second thing is that the foundation texts, as I said, are a history of the present, explaining why things are the way they are, why they even have to be the way they are, which of course is not so as inevitable as it seems. What else? I think I said this already. And then we looked at, in looking at the creation story, we looked at how the whole cosmos is organized to create reality, and then we go from the whole organization of the cosmos to a pinpoint on the planet, the Garden of Eden, where second creation happens, and a second dichotomy is created, and that is man and woman, right? Man and woman. But that stories can't even sustain their own oppositions, because oppositions are not actually natural. So what are some of the contradictions with reality in the Garden of Eden around the sexual roles of men and women?
Good and evil.
So we have good and evil. Let's go there in 1 second. So what's the first surprise in terms of the roles of men and women in the creation story?
They're naked.
So they're naked, they realize they're naked, but you have man created out of the earth and woman woman created out of the body of the man. So we know that people ordinarily come out of the bodies of women, right? So that reversal is the first indication that the text is uncomfortable with itself, that there's something discomforting there. Because if God is a creator God, if God is the hero of the book, and God is certainly the hero of the Bible, what's God's greatest act of magic? Creation, and creating life. But in the real world of experience, who creates life?
A woman.
Woman. So you invent a story that accounts for why women create life. And is it a blessing? It's a curse. Right. So that's the first upside down moment.
And the snake
And-
talks.
Right, and that's the other one. So evil. So the second upside down moment that we noticed is that everybody knows from all time, and certainly Christianity makes a huge fuss about this, every painting, everything, why do women have to light the Shabbos candles? Because women deprive the world of light. Because who's responsible for the first sin?
The woman.
The woman, because she tempted Adam. But when you read the story, who tempted Adam?
The snake.
Well, right. So Eve tells Adam to do it, but Eve says it wasn't me. It was this walking, talking, erect snake. Who loses his punishment is,
Has to crawl.
let's put it differently.
He has to.
Right, it's an erect snake and it loses its erection after the crime. So which sex is responsible? Right, so which sex is responsible for the temptation? The story says it's the woman, but the story actually says, right, this thing that has a mind of its own, right, that is disembodied, and if not for this tempting woman, this thing wouldn't have been tempted, and so forth. So this, again, my point is that the story makes an explicit claim that the female is responsible, but undermines that claim in the character that shows you you're in the land of fable, a walking, talking snake, right? And the last thing I want to review is that also in the story we notice that there is an equivalency established between the three consequences of eating the tree. God says you will die. The snake says, no, 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 you'll just become a grown-up like God. You'll know everything there is to know. And what actually happens is all that they're aware of is their own sexuality. But we don't experience this as a contradiction reading the story. We just allow that it's all the same thing. That knowledge and sex and death is our mortality and is the human condition, and that they are the same. They are bound up in each other. So, what seems to be inevitable by the end of the story is separate spheres for men and women. Women will have babies, it will hurt, that there's an enmity between the snake and the woman, right, which is a threat to her, and we know what snakes are in this story, that men have to labor the soil, that adulthood is the consequence of the story, the conditions of adult life. And it feels inevitable because, of course, to the writers of this myth, it was inevitable, that was life, that you're out of the garden, you're expelled from childhood. But what's also inevitable is what happens next. So we didn't read this far, but we all know what happens next. Adam and Eve leave the garden, and what happens next? They have children, and their first children are Cain and Abel. They have 2 sons, and now this is life as we imagine it. The nuclear family, a mother, a father, and 2 sons. And what happens with Cain and Abel? One kills the other. Now, I ask you parents, is this inevitable?
No.
No. So some of you will say no, and some people will say yes. From a Freudian perspective, of course, sibling rivalry, there's always a competition between sons. And some people will say, no, that is not inevitable. I don't think it's inevitable either, but I just want to suggest to you that these stories, like the Oedipus story, you know, is it true that every boy, at least in his fantasy life, wants to murder his father and sleep with his mother? I don't know. But foundation myths feel real. They have a kind of real feeling in our culture. So and if you jump, we're not going to go here today or even in the course, but if you jump out of the book of Genesis and into the book of Exodus, who are the human heroes in the book of Exodus? Exodus, of course, is the founding myth of the Jewish people. It is
Abraham.
So Abraham is Genesis. We're going to get to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. We're just about to leap into that first family in the book of Genesis. We go from the creation of the world to the creation of the first people, to Adam and Eve, then Cain and Abel, their sons. Then you have the death of Cain kills Abel. Then the world gets terrible. There's the Tower of Babel. God's really annoyed, and there's a flood. Starts over with Noah, and in 5 minutes, the world is populated again, and the Bible has a problem. So it decides, well, I can't tell the whole history of everybody. I'm just tell the history of the Jewish people, and you start with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, all fathers and sons. Finally, Jacob has 12 sons, the 12 tribes of Israel, and we end with the stories of Joseph. And then you leap into the next book in the Bible, and it's Exodus. Who's the hero of Exodus? Moses. And Aaron. And Miriam. Siblings, another sibling sent. Are they rivals?
Yes and no.
Yes and no, but mostly they're partners. Right?
They help
Miriam
each other.
saves the baby Moses' life at the river. Miriam leads the women while Moses leads the men. Aaron speaks for Moses because he's slow of speech. And together, Moses and Aaron pray for Miriam when she's sick. I mean, they are a partnership. They are a partnership, and they lead the people together. It's another model of siblings. So,
But they have different roles.
they have different roles, for sure.
Categorization of everything.
Absolutely. They have different roles. They're the priesthood and so forth. I don't want to linger on this, but I want to just suggest a narrative possibility here. You have the story of the world. In the beginning, it's easy. God makes the planets and he, organizes everything, and he makes a person, and out of the person there's another person, and then those people make a couple more people, and everybody gets a story. What's going to happen if you're telling a story in order, linearly, right? This person, this person, this person. That's just a problem when you're trying to tell the story of the whole world as the world begins to populate. What's the technical problem?
Well, so they group them into.
It's a long story. Yeah, we have a lot of time. Say what?
Differentiation.
We have these differentiations. You have Cain and Abel. Why does Cain have to kill Abel? What's the problem?
Jealousy.
The problem between them is jealousy. It absolutely explains why there's murder. But what are they jealous of?
Acceptance by God.
Acceptance by God in the story.
Who's going to be the leader of the future?
Who's going to inherit the narrative future? Right? There's room for everybody to get a story when the world is sparsely populated. It's the problem of exponents. Right? It's an exponential problem. If the mommy has 5 children, and then somebody's child is going to inherit the story, and then their child is going to inherit you can't tell the story this way. You can only tell it this way. All of Genesis, right? By the time you get to Exodus, you have a family, they're leading the people, and the people are just the people. They're one character. The people Israel is a character. And it's the people Israel from now on. But in Genesis, the question is, who inherits the narrative future? Who gets the story? In the world, the ancient world, and in fact in most of the world to this day, who inherits?
The
Eldest
elders.
son.
The eldest son.
Double portion.
Double portion, right? The eldest son, and you would think the eldest son would inherit the narrative future. In the Hebrew Bible, who inherits?
The young.
Always. So every single story till we get to the end of Genesis, is a story of sibling rivalry to explain the reversal of what we call primogeniture, the firstborn son inheriting. And it's a pattern story. It's a story in which God and Mother make a pact to give the narrative future to her favorite son, the younger son. And that's what we're going to look at starting today. But before that, let me just go through this for a minute. But do you follow?
Yes.
So you follow that we have a narrative problem of who gets the story. So then you have a bunch of stories that are going to explain why it's this son. And then the rest of the sons, so what happens? Abraham has 2 sons, Isaac and Ishmael. What happens to Ishmael? He goes off and he creates his own people. Jacob and Esau, Jacob will inherit, and Esau will make his own peoples. Right? It's why the world is populated with lots of peoples. By the time we get to the end of Genesis, which of Jacob's sons will inherit the narrative future? Well, Joseph will get the longest story of all, but it will be about, for Judaism, but ultimately it will be about the reconciliation of these divided brothers, right? The fragmented people Israel, the 12 tribes. It will end with their reconciliation, and nobody will inherit in particular. They'll all inherit, because they will be the tribes of Israel. And then 5 minutes later, as we enter the book of Exodus, they will be a swarming, sprawling, populating people, and they're going to have to get out of slavery, and it's going to be a different story. It's no longer about who inherits the narrative future. That's just the book of Genesis. You're with me? Okay. So, The world is multiplying exponentially, and we have these stories of sibling rivalry. In the first of these stories, and this will be important when we get to the end of our sessions with the Book of Ruth. In the first of these stories, Abraham elects to be the father of the Jewish people by choosing God. He's the first monotheist, right? And we have that story. And then there are stories about Abraham, but they're not actually in the Bible. The breaking of the idols and all that stuff. So God makes a promise to Abraham. And the promise is,
You will inherit this land.
You go to the earth again.
okay, you will inherit the land of Israel, right? The covenant, the promise.
And your sky.
Exactly. All right. Their people will be as numerous as the grains of sand on the beach and the stars in the sky. That's a lot of people, and that's a big promise. That's the promise to Abraham. And there's many a joke about what I'm about to say now. And Abraham waits, and he waits, and he waits, and he waits, and he waits, and finally Sarah,
At 80.
is old, and the Bible's not shy about the human body.
Right.
Not only is she old,
She's barren.
well, she's barren, but her barrenness is, and this is important, is explicit, right? It's not that she's barren, she's old. She's menopausal, right? She's beyond the years of childbearing. She's in menopause, it says so. Every single hero in the Hebrew Bible who has a birth story, they don't all have birth stories, but every hero who has a birth story has what kind of mother? A barren mother.
Rachel.
Yes, all the mothers are barren. What? Now, what? Totally. What? Because there is a problem with these two words modifying each other. What is wrong with the phrase barren mother? It's right. We literary critics call that an oxymoron. Right? If you're a mother, you're not barren. Right. Right. If you're barren, you're not a mother. And if you're right, the other way around. That's right. It doesn't work. Except every single hero who has a birth story has a barren mother. So what does that mean? Sarah can't have children, so she gives Abraham her concubine. The concubine has Ishmael. Presumably, Ishmael will inherit. But magic. Some angels come, and there's a whole hosting thing, and the angels say, you know what, Abraham? Sarah's gonna have a baby. And Sarah's eavesdropping at the tent. And what does Sarah do? She laughs. Everybody knows this. And then they name the child. Abraham laughs too. I have a whole lecture on Sarah's laughter, but they laugh, and then they name Isaac, this little boy, Yitzchak. He will laugh. I like to say that we are the inheritors of laughter, that we are the laughing people. That's a big joke, right? It's like, you're kidding, right? We don't know what the laughter means, and even God doesn't know what the laughter means. He says, why'd Sarah laugh? And she's like, I didn't. He says, you did. But Sarah laughs, and this baby is born, and they name him Yitzchak, and it's a miracle, right? And then what happens?
He's going to sacrifice the Akedah.
Okay, we have the Akedah, the sacrifice, but before that, I'll take you back there.
Ishmael interferes.
Ishmael interferes, Ishmael something. What happens?
Sarah doesn't want Ishmael in the household.
Right, Sarah will banish Hagar, the concubine, and Ishmael. Everybody knows this story. So this is our first story of sibling rivalry after Cain and Abel. I want to back up for 1 second. I want to suggest to you that one reason for the flood, that do-over, is because the Bible has a problem of a populating world, and it can't choose whose story to tell. So God says, everybody's a mess, I'm starting over. And he washes the world away, and he starts over with Noah, right? And 2 of each, it's manageable again for a story, right? And that's after the Tower of Babel, and so it's manageable again for a story. And then the Bible needs to decide how to settle on whose story it will be. And it settles on the people that believe in this God, and settles on Abraham. And now the stories of sibling rivalry begin. So Ishmael, again, these are such deeply familiar stories. What does Sarah see? Sarah sees Isaac, or Ishmael, tell me, there's a verb. What is Ishmael doing when Sarah says, get this boy out of here?
He must be exposing himself or
With
exposing himself, playing what? Mitzachek. The Hebrew word is mitzachek with a tzadi, right? I just need to tell you that because the modern Hebrew word for playing is mitzachek with a samach. It's not the same, right? But mitzachek, she sees Ishmael mitzachek Yitzchak. It's the same word. So if you wanted to translate the plan, I did some playing with you with language last time around, words that are the same in the first chapters. The wiliness of the snake, arum, is the same as arumim, the nakedness of, right. So here, let's translate it in a way that resonates with the Hebrew. What Sarah sees is Ishmael Isaacing Isaac. Okay, Isaacing Isaac. We don't know what that means. It's usually translated as playing or mocking, but what we know is, from her point of view, whatever she saw was not good. How do we know that?
she sends him
Right,
away.
because she banishes him. But, so the rabbis go in a million different directions on since they need to explain why she did this. And people right in the front were right there. They're like, okay, he's Isaac and Isaac, this is not good, playing dirty. Some rabbis say that's a possibility. What else might he be doing? Isaac and Isaac. He's making him laugh, laughing at him, mocking him, making fun of him. Some rabbis say that. Some rabbis say he's pretending to be Isaac. He's Isaacing Isaac. And what we will know from the next story, the one we're going to look at in 2 minutes, is that when one brother pretends to be another, sometimes they can steal the narrative future. And Sarah knows my baby is supposed to inherit.
She was fearful that
Whatever it is she says, I do not want this boy to inherit with my son Isaac. And I also want to offer you another possibility. Many of the rabbinic interpreters say that what Sarah saw were the 2 boys playing. Simple. Playing. Child's play. And she's like, maybe they're friends. I don't want them inheriting together. Right? I don't like this friendship. And that possibility I want you to hold on to as we go forward in history. Because I like to believe that we choose the interpretation we need for our own historical moment. And I live in hope that one day we will say that what Ishmael and Isaac were doing was playing because they were friends. And there is evidence in the Bible that their relationship resumed because they buried their father together. And according to one rabbinic tradition, when Sarah dies, Abraham remarries. That's in the Bible. He marries a woman named Keturah. But in the rabbinic tradition, there is the belief that Keturah is Hagar. That he goes back to Hagar, and Ishmael is re-enfolded in the Abrahamic narrative. I offer you this as a political possibility.
Could this mean that maybe the Muslims and Jews would one day be friends?
That's
and
right.
together?
That's where I'm imagining this possibility. It's a little utopian, but whatever. This is all because multiple things are available in the rabbinic interpretations. But the dominant one is that whatever it is, it was such that Sarah needed to banish Ishmael. But who's head of this family?
Abraham.
Abraham. Does he want to do it?
No.
Back in, compare that to Adam and Eve and Abraham and Sarah. The woman is more powerful in getting the man to do something.
There you go. So everybody
Both
says,
said yes.
patriarchy, 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 men are boss of everything. What I want to show you is that in the unconscious of the tradition, men are boss of everything because in their stories and in their imagination, women are boss of them, right? And are more powerful, have a kind of power under the story that they feel like if they don't contain it, they're going to lose all authority. Because here you have, that's like, if not for the woman, God and I would still be friends and living in the Garden of Eden. I'd still be a child at home with my parents. But the temptation of adulthood is the temptation of woman, right? Of wanting that knowledge, that delicious fruit, more than complacency. And so we'd be in yeshiva all day long, but if not for women. Okay, so now let's go back. So in this story,
She has a headache.
in this story, in the Abraham story, does Abraham want to banish Ishmael?
No.
No. So it seems to the reader that Sarah's right. But Abraham, who's the authority, doesn't want to do it. How do we know that Sarah's right?
You can't have two women in the same kitchen, maybe.
Well, certainly every story afterwards implies that these two women didn't get along. You have a million paintings that are beautiful of Sarah banishing them, and you have, or Abraham banishing them, and Sarah in the background, Hagar over here. Many of them, they're very moving, actually, this art, because it's a sad story. Yeah.
The jealousy is very strong.
The jealousy is very strong. There are several episodes of, is she rude to Sarah? Is she, not a respectful servant now that she has a child of her own? But we know, and we don't have the text in front of us, so I can't make, it would be obvious to you if we read the story together. We know that Sarah is right, because who's the real boss of the story? Here's my religious friend. Who's the real boss of the story? God! Right? God! God says to Abraham,
Listen to Sarah.
listen to Sarah. Right? So we have it on God's authority that Sarah gets her way. And then, of course, Isaac will inherit the story. Then we'll talk about the Akedah next time, the near sacrifice of Isaac. You're going to get grains of sand and stars in the sky and all that stuff, and you have one puny child, and God says, go kill him. But out of nothing will come everything, because of course he'll be rescued in the end. This is what I call, I was that a close call. And I was that a close call is the Jewish story. It's the whole story of Jewish history. And when we look at the book of Ruth, that's what that story really is all about. It's about the triumph of faith over fear. But I'm anticipating. Stay with Isaac and Ishmael. Sarah has the little boy. Sarah has the younger son, and she banishes the older one and the concubine, even though they're both Abraham's sons, because when God tells Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, he says, sacrifice your son, and Abraham's sort of like, which one? But anyway, certainly in the Midrash, but let's go back for a minute. We have this one little boy, and he's going to inherit the narrative future, and it's Sarah who decided. Sarah was old, she was menopausal, she was barren. And who actually decides? Sarah decides because God agrees with her. So, if you have a barren mother, and all the mothers of heroes are barren, what does that say about men and women in these stories? Draw some conclusions. Why do you have barren mothers? What's the point of making the mother barren?
Because
So
it
she'll come out
leaves you the
stronger in the end.
possibility you need some kind of intervention to,
So God has a role.
So God has a role, right? God enters history, human history, where we don't see a lot of evidence of God all the time. at these moments to make the births of heroes, right? And it looks like, who creates life? We know this already. Yeah, but in our real experience, they come women, right? Babies are born out of women's bodies. But important men, God has to help. So it looks like, you might say, that this is yet a reprise of the jealousy of women's creative power. Step back with me a minute. Who really has no role in the creation of life in these stories of heroes? The fathers, the human fathers, and there's no book that knows this better than the New Testament, right? The Christian scriptures knows Hebrew Bible and rewrites it. If all your mothers are barren, our mother is a virgin. And if you have a virgin or a barren mother, who is completely not so important? The father. The human father, because it takes God the Father to make the hero. And not only that, at least the father's the boss of the family. Not. Right? Because when Abraham says, actually, let's not banish Ishmael, Sarah says, I'm in charge here. And God says, yeah, listen to her. So the mother and God enter into a pact that's not she's like, give me a baby. And he's like, okay. And then she says, and a baby who's going to be the next to inherit the narrative future, even though he's the younger one. And God's like, okay, it's a deal. So it's a pact between mother and God that excludes the human father. The Norton Anthology of American Jewish Literature has one joke in it. There's a little section about, maybe more than one joke, there's a little section of jokes. Am I going to get this right? I'm not such a joke teller, but I'm going to try. It's a riddle. No, it's not a riddle, it's a joke. The joke goes like this. A little boy comes home from school, very excited, and he says, Mom, I got the part of the Jewish father in the school play. And she says, I want you to go back and demand a speaking part. Right? You've heard this joke. It was written on the pyramids, this joke. What is that? The reason you laugh is, what do you recognize? Truth. What's the truth? What's the stereotype?
Man has no say in the matter.
That men have, that the Jewish man is quiet, doesn't have anything to say. And this is a joke that manages to insult everybody. The mother, the child who will presumably grow up to be a Jewish father, the father, I mean, it is a caricature of the Jewish family. I'm going to suggest that the origin of this Jewish family and the character of these roles, including the Jewish mother, begins in the Bible. And it begins with the barren mother business. So we have this pact between God and remember that Sarah eavesdrops. Okay, now I want to look at this story that I arranged for today, which it took me exactly more than half the class to clear my throat. But now let's look at today's story. This is chapter 27. And this is like we're honing in on one moment in a pattern to look at some of the details. Should I read out loud? Does somebody else want to read?
No.
You, me, okay. When Isaac was old and his eyes were too dim to see. Now remember, right? Isaac was the little boy who was saved. Now he's grown up. Right? And he is blind. He's blind from old age. So old is weak in this story, and blind, is coming to the end of his days. And blindness, according to Freud, what happens to Oedipus when he discovers his crime? Right, he's blinded. When Samson is seduced by Delilah and he's emasculated, his hair is cut off, what do the Philistines do? They blind him, because blindness is symbolic castration. It's a loss of potency. You lose your eyes. You lose your power in the world which in masculine authority, that's eyes, sometimes it's a compromised foot, right? Feet and eyes, Oedipus is also lame. It's a way of compromising masculinity. This is what happens to Rochester at the end of Jane Eyre. He's been, he wants to have 2 women. So how does the novelist punish him? She blinds him and she makes him lame. It's an Oedipal moment, right? Okay, so Isaac is old. His eyes were too dim to see. He called his older son Esau. Now, older son. Who's supposed to inherit? The older son. But what do we also know about Esau and Jacob?
The 2 different people. Very different.
They're a dichotomy. We're going to interrogate that today. But that's the first thing you said. What's actually true about these boys?
Friends.
One is a blessed and one is withdrawn.
We have this idea that one is aggressive, one is a scholar. Right, we know which one we prefer and we give them all the good traits. But back up. Do they have 2 mothers?
No.
Is one really older? What are they?
Twins.
Twins! They are twins. And you are all saying they're twins and they're opposites. We know what Esau's red and hairy, and he's an outdoorsman, and we're going to emphasize the differences. There are traditions, and many paintings actually, that support these traditions, that they are as opposite as could be, and there are other paintings that support the other tradition, and that is that they are identical twins. That they are identical twins, a little different. So when Jacob says, you sound like this one, but you could be this one, that really it's because, like, when I call my sister's house and one of my nieces picks up the phone, she sometimes says, is this Aunt Lori or is this Mommy?
That's true.
Right? Because our voices are very similar. I can't tell my own daughters apart on the telephone because the voices of siblings are often very close. So I want you to allow this possibility for 1 minute. But we know that Isaac is prepared to give the better blessing, as he's supposed to the twin that came out first, Esau. So he's preparing to do this. He answered, here I am. And he said, I am old now, and I do not know how soon I may die. Take your gear, your quiver and bow, and go into the open and hunt me some game. Then prepare a dish for me, such as I like, and bring it to me to eat, so that I may give you my innermost blessing before I die. Okay, what do we know about Esau from this right now? That he's a hunter, okay? The connotations of being a hunter we will talk about. It may not be true in the Bible, but it's true later. All these stereotypes are later than the Bible. They're not in the Bible. They're imposed on the Bible. So he's a hunter.
And the rabbis don't refer hunters, they refer scholars.
Right. The rabbis, exactly, prefer scholars to hunters. And of course, Jacob seems like a guy who lives in the tent and not in the fields. Rebekah had been listening to Isaac, listening as Isaac spoke to his son Esau. Does this sound familiar? The posture of eavesdropping outside the tent, where authority seems to happen, we've now seen in both matriarchs. There are only 2 so far, and both of them are eavesdroppers. It's where history happens, is in the tent, with angels talking to men and fathers talking to sons. But where's the woman? Listening in. She's excluded again. The appearance is the exclusion of woman, but what is the story going to show you? She's excluded, but she will take matters into her own hands because she's actually eavesdropping. So what does this tell you about the men who wrote these stories? And in fact, men wrote these stories.
They didn't like women.
Or they were afraid of them.
Yeah.
They were afraid of them, right? They were afraid of their authority. Because we think we're controlling everything, fathers and sons and angels and men, but out there's subversion, right? There's subversion of our authority, and it comes in the form of...
Yenter.
Say what?
Yenters.
Yentas, exactly. Wives and mothers. Wives and mothers, right? They're supposed to stay in the tent, but, They're wives and mothers.
Well, they have eyes in the back of their head.
Exactly. Jewish mothers, Jewish wives, and that's the joke, right? That's the joke. So you have one assumption that women have no power. And another assumption is that they have too much power in the kitchen and, as we will discover next time, in the bedroom. Right? That's the title of our session, sir, is Bedrooms and Battlefields. Okay. Rebekah had been listening as Isaac spoke to his son Esau. When Esau had gone out into the open to hunt game and bring home, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, I overheard your father speaking to your brother Esau, saying, bring me some game and prepare a dish for me to eat, that I may bless you with the Lord's approval before I die. Now, my son, listen carefully as I instruct you. Go to the flock and fetch me 2 choice kids, and I will make of them a dish for your father as he likes. Then take it to your father to eat, in order that he may bless you before he dies. Jacob answered his mother Rebekah, but my brother Esau is a hairy man, and I am smooth-skinned. If my father touches me, I shall appear to him as a trickster, and bring upon myself a curse, not a blessing. Pause. Jacob's reaction to this plan is?
Sure, scared.
Scared. He's like, Mom, I'm not so sure about this. I'm gonna get caught. I don't know. Thanks a lot. I now get you're preferring me, but really, I'm not so sure. Her response? His mother said to him, your curse, my son, be upon me. Just do as I say and go fetch them for me. Her response is, in effect, I'm in charge, do as I say, and I'll take the blame. It's like, go to medical school. He's like, I don't really want to. I'd rather be a plumber. I don't care what you want, is pretty much the point here. I don't care what you want. I don't care if you're afraid. I'm ambitious on your behalf because I'm your Jewish mother.
And I know best.
And I know best. I'm your Jewish mother, and I know best. And here, this is not the child of some concubine. This is her own son. Her own son. And we know that she's doing the right thing. How do we know? We didn't read this part of the story. Because when she's pregnant with these boys,
The elder shall serve the younger.
the elder shall serve the younger. God tells her.
Yeah.
She is already just doing what God told her. Because who's the partnership?
Mothers and God.
Mothers and God. They haven't worked out. Isaac has a plan. He's going to bless Esau. Who doesn't care? Rebekah and God, who have a different plan to reverse the rule of primogeniture, to give the better blessing and the narrative future to the younger son. Here's an anthropological possibility. Maybe the Israelites were a younger people. Maybe they were a weaker people. And maybe the point is, the younger, the weaker shall prevail, because who's stronger? Their God, right? The Jewish God. Listen to your mother is definitely the moral of the story. Listen to your mother. Okay. He got them and brought them to his mother. His mother prepared a dish.
Isn't it, she doesn't tell Isaac. She about the prophecy. Wouldn't that have solved the whole thing?
Hello, what a lovely point. And you should write the midrash. How come she didn't tell her husband? And this is one of the questions I was going to ask is, what's behind the story? What can you assume about the family dynamic? About the relationship between Rebekah and Isaac? Between Rebekah and Esau? Between Isaac and Jacob? Like, that's fraught with background. The answer to that question is, there's a very obvious answer. It's the same answer as the literary critics call it, how many children hath Lady Macbeth? We know that Lady Macbeth has children. They're mentioned in the play. How many?
We don't know.
Exactly, that's the answer. It's not in the story, right? It's not in the story. We have to make it up. And believe me, many people do. That's called midrash. making up the answers to the questions implicit in the story. We don't know why Rebecca didn't. Maybe if it was overt, because there are always stories of manipulation, seduction, tricking. That's how the story, that's where the stereotypes come from. You know, you have a good, healthy possibility here. God told me, and what might he have said?
Don't tell you.
Go forth and multiply.
Or right, God might have she might have said to Isaac, God told me, and he might have said, I don't believe you. Or she is fulfilling God's wish, and we don't know why that wish wasn't articulated to Isaac, or why she didn't tell him, but this is the story that shows how she fulfills it. He got them, brought them to his mother prepared a dish such as his father liked. Rebecca then took the best clothes of her older son Esau, which were there in the house, and had her younger son Jacob put them on. She covered his hands. I know, it's really manipulative. The hairless part of his neck, with the skins of kids. Then she put in the hands of her son Jacob the dish and the bread that she had prepared. He went to his father and said, Father. And he said, Yes, which of my sons are you? Jacob said to his father, I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. Pray, sit and eat of my gain, that you may give me your innermost blessing. Isaac said to his son, How did you succeed so quickly, my son? And he said, Because the Lord your God granted me good fortune. Now who's implied in the deceit? Who's implicated in the deceit? God. He said, first he lies, he says, I'm Esau. Then Isaac says, How'd you get here so fast? It takes a little longer to hunt game and prepare food. It's like, well, God helped me. Oh, yeah, okay. It's digging this hole deeper. Isaac said to Jacob, Come closer that I may feel you, my son, whether you are really my son Esau or not. So Jacob grew close to his father, who felt him and wondered, The voice is the voice of Jacob, yet the hands are the hands of Esau. He did not recognize him because his hands were hairy like those of his brother Esau, and he blessed him. Pause. Does Isaac know which son this is? Suspects. Maybe. There are three right answers. Yeah.
It's likely even. He may have known his son very well and known that he would be deceitful.
Okay, so maybe this reminds me of a story. I have no time for stories. So I once was waking my younger child up. She's now 26 years old, but she was like 3 at the time. And I was waking her up in the morning. She didn't want to get out of bed. And I said, Who's this little girl in her bed? And in her sleep, this child says, I'm Ronya, which is her older sister's name. And I said, Ronya, you shrunk in your sleep. So that's a game of, if you're going to pretend not to know who I am, I'm going to pretend to be somebody else. Right? I know that you know that I know that you know. Right? Maybe we can play here. Maybe Rebecca and Isaac planned this whole thing. Maybe we don't know, but we do know. From the perspective of the text, does Isaac know?
Maybe it's his Isaac. Maybe it's his way of always having wanted to give the blessing to Jacob, and now it's the setup is he can do it.
That's certainly a possibility. It's an out for Isaac. The text says he did not recognize him. That's the Bible. He did not recognize him. That suggests that Isaac does not know that this is Jacob. However,
He's blind.
He's suspicious.
He's suspicious 3 times. Which of my sons are you? Really? Come closer. All right, you feel like Esau. You sound like Jacob. He registers his suspicion 3 times. What's that called? That is called self-deception. Self-deception is when you know and you don't know. Have you ever deceived yourself? Okay, now this is like being a barren mother. What's the problem, philosophically, conceptually, with self-deception? self-deception. Self-deception.
It's not rewarding.
Can you deceive yourself?
Yes, easily.
How can you deceive yourself?
Denial.
Right, my favorite river, denial. How can you deceive yourself? Do you know? Don't you know?
No, because
If you
want
know, because you want to, but think, are you deceived? If you know, are you really, can you lie to yourself?
That's right.
If you know, you don't, you know. If you don't know, you don't know. How can you know and not know at the same time?
You don't want to know.
You don't want to know.
You have an out.
So if you don't want to know so much, you make yourself not know what you do know. Follow me here. This is not actually philosophically possible, but we all know it is possible. It is only possible if you split yourself in two. If you have a self that knows and a self that doesn't know. That's called the unconscious. Somewhere you know, but you don't want to know, so you don't let yourself. It means you have a split self. A self that knows and a self that doesn't know. That is self-deception. We are running out of time and we'll pick up here next time, but I want to draw a couple conclusions here. He confers the blessing, and then there's a heart-rending moment when Esau comes back, and and there's a crying and the grudge and everything. So we have the origin of several stereotypes. We talked about the barren mother and the characterization of the father, but you have a father here who's weak and old, who was also a younger son and a domestic son, whose mother was ambitious on his behalf, Isaac. And he has two sons, or two selves, two kinds of men, two kinds of masculinity. One is domestic and at home and the mama's boy, and the other is wild and hairy. And this is about patriarchy, literally, the patriarchy, the literal first fathers. Who's going to inherit the narrative future? Who does the man want to inherit it? The one who, by contemporary standards, again, not biblical standards, is hairy and outdoorsy and Esau. And the mom wants the domesticated good boy. You said, somebody up here says, the scholar, the mama's boy to inherit.
The nerd.
We can imagine, since they're twins, that these are the split parts of Isaac. What does Jacob do? He puts on hairy clothes. He pretends to be his brother. So I call this a passing as a man. He masquerades as a real man to become a man, to inherit the narrative future. We all are who we aren't. We're all performing our identities. He performs the masculinity that his father requires to become the next patriarch, to inherit the blessing. One can say that the twins, in literary terms, are split halves of the paternal psyche, right? Two halves of, or you could say they're literally twins, you can say they're identical, you can say that they're opposite. This is an integrating moment when one pretends to be the other to inherit the narrative future. And you have a bunch of stereotypes for which these are origins. We talked about the origin of the weak Jewish father, the overbearing Jewish mother, ambitious on behalf of her sons. But we also have another stereotype here, and that is the stereotype of Jewish men. The other men, the one who go out there and make the fathers of the other peoples, the Ishmaels and the Esau's, they're the Ishmael, just like Esau, carries a bow, right? He's bigger, and he's older, and he's hairier, and he's a hunter. And then you have Isaac, who's the mama's boy, and Jacob, who's the mama's boy. So what does that say about the Jews? They're mama's boys, right? It is an insecure masculinity, both the fathers and the sons. They become doctors because their mothers tell them to. They not because they want that their desires are subsumed by their mothers, and they're undermined as grown-ups by their wives. And so this is again, There's nothing real about stereotypes. I want you to appreciate that. Part of the reason we read these stories is to expose some of the negative stereotypes that we see because it's not in the story, right? We don't know that domesticated men are, that this is how the Bible sees itself. It's an old tribal book, right? But this is what's happened over time. So much so, and I'll stop here, that in the medieval period, the Renaissance in Europe, it was widely believed that Jewish men menstruated. There were science articles about it. It's connected to the fact that the oddness for European men of circumcision and all the blood rituals around men and Jews and kashrut and draining of blood and the Passover story and the blood libel. But Jews weren't white. They were neither white nor non-white. They were anomalous. And racially. They were a race of their own. They weren't the white race. And the men weren't really men and the women weren't really women. The women were too masculine and the men were too feminine. Again, this anomalous category that we still have residue of in our own stereotypes. We will pick up next time with stories of bedrooms and battlefields. We will look in particular at Yael and Sisera and Deborah. We will look at Delilah. We will look at stories of bedrooms and battlefield. And the last class we'll look at the book of Ruth, and we will wrap up a series of these patterns. Thank you.
Thank you.